Hello fellow Clashers, welcome to another episode of Exploring the Meta with KairosTime. Today we're going to be taking a look at a very diverse meta, but most specifically we're going to be looking at 3 different decks that are most commonly being used in the top 200 right now. They're very strong decks right now. I wanted to give a big thanks to Woody for making a post about this in Reddit and supplying these different decks. Now, there were other decks as well that are very popular right now, but these were by far the 3 most popular and very strong decks in the meta right now, for both the ladder and also for tournament gameplay. Now, if you're wanting a strong deck, these are good decks to copy, but if you're wanting to counter the meta, I suggest looking at all the cards in here and crafting a deck that is going to be able to counter the majority of these deck combinations. Before we get started, I did want to let you know that Kairos Warriors is still receiving applications. If you're interested in doing that, check the description below for a link to the application process. With 12 spots open, we are currently ranked in the top 200 of North America. So we're doing very well, we're having a ton of fun, and we're looking for the most positive and best players in the game. Now, this meta is actually a lot of fun. It's very diverse. There's a lot of different decks that are working. Even right now, you're seeing me play against somebody that is using a Mortar and Spear Hut Hog combination. It's a ton of fun. When I was playing him, I believe that this was ranked 8 in a challenge or something like that. So he had 8 wins and doing pretty well with this deck. That just goes to show that right now, almost anything goes, and that's a really fun way to be playing the game right now. So you can mess around with a lot of different things, try and do things. There's not one deck that seems to be really overpowering right now. One thing that I've loved is the fact that Hog Rider decks are becoming more usable. As Giant Poison was taken out of the game, basically, Hog Rider decks are seeing a big strong comeback, and it's a ton of fun to be playing them. This deck uses the really strong skeleton army as a really strong defense, and also uses the rocket to try and have kind of an ulterior win condition so that you can try and win in this match. What I love about this deck is that it uses the Ice Wizard and the Princess to be able to use a really strong defense, and that's kind of what we're seeing right now. We're seeing a lot of decks that use really powerful defenses, so it's harder to get damage on your opponent's tower. That being said, cards like the Miner and even the Hog Rider that are more guaranteed to do some damage onto the enemy tower are more commonly being used right now. And that's actually a really great segue into my next deck here, that is an Xbow deck. For those of you that don't know, siege decks, including the Mortar and the Xbow, used to be very popular and one of the main primary win conditions. Since then, they have kind of taken a step back until the introduction of the Mega Minion. Now, I've been playing Xbow decks and even Mortar decks with the Mega Minion, mostly just for fun. But now that Giant Poison decks are no longer a strong option in the arena, the Xbow and the Mortar are gaining some popularity. Now, this does have a lot to do with the fact that the Mega Minion allows you to play more defensively and get that Xbow down. But that being said, this is a very strong combination, and this is something you're going to want to be watching out for both in the tournament and in the ladder. This is the deck that I'm currently using in the ladder, mostly because it's working. It's not my favorite play style, but it does work. It's a ton of fun. There are still a lot of counters to it, but with that skeleton army and that Mega Minion in there, the Xbow is definitely a strong combination to be using right now. Another thing that I wanted to mention is spellbait decks. A spellbait deck is a deck that has a lot of different troops in there that are all about trying to pull your opponent's spells out of them. Now then, if you are able to do that, then you strike with something that your opponent won't be able to stop, like a minion horde, or even a skeleton army, maybe even a goblin barrel. But whatever it is, it makes it difficult for your opponent to respond to that. Spellbait decks are starting to take some more popularity, and they're a lot of fun, actually. I love playing spellbait decks because it takes a lot of skill to be able to figure out what to do in certain circumstances and finding out what your opponent's spells are. But once you do that, they're strong combinations and they're difficult to stop. The most common spellbait decks right now are including the Goblin Barrel and the Skeleton Army, and then also the Minion Horde. If you can get a mirror in there to make your Goblin Barrel unzappable in tournament gameplay, then that's also a lot of fun as well. One deck type that I wanted to mention is in the ladder is the Royal Giant. The Royal Giant seems to be a lot more popular now and is a very strong option. What is really great about the Royal Giant is that he's so good at stopping defenses like the Xbow and the Mortar and allowing you to really get some good damage on the tower. He gets right up there, he has a ton of health points, and if you can over level him as a common, then he is even more difficult to handle. To those of you that are trying to figure out exactly how to counter our siege decks, the Mortar and the Xbow, one thing I would recommend as well is if you're not wanting to do a Royal Giant deck, then you definitely can do another type of Hog Cycle deck. One of my favorite ways to stop a Xbow is by placing a defensive tower right in front of it. If you have the Inferno Tower, that's a great option, but you can even do that with the cannon. This next deck that we're going to be taking a look at is a great deck to play if you were a really big fan of the Giant Poison deck. It is a Giant Bowler Lightning deck and is very strong right now. This is the most commonly used deck in the top 200 at the moment. You can replace the Zap for the Log if you have it, but I actually have both and I prefer the Zap, honestly. This deck is a ton of fun. Even with a level 3 bowler, I'm able to get a challenge winning replay that you're actually watching right here. In the challenge, I was able to win using this deck, and I lost a couple of times, mostly because I was still learning the deck, but once I figured it out, this deck was so strong and I was able to plow right to the end. The strongest combination with this deck is the Giant and the Mega Minion combination. If you have that and you are able to use the Lightning, you'll see how a Lightning is just such a strong way to shut down almost any defensive troops, including the Inferno Tower. While we're watching this replay, I did want to talk about some other cards, mostly the Poison. The Poison has been a very powerful card for a long time. Supercell removed its slowing effects. That being said, I do think that the Poison is still usable, but it's probably not the best option. If you were going to try and use a 4 elixir spell, the Fireball honestly is the better option at the moment. Unless you're really struggling with swarms on your opponent's side, then the Fireball is almost always a better option. If Supercell does end up increasing the damage per second of the Poison, then I think that it'll be a good option, but for right now, the Lightning or the Fireball is probably the way to go. Another card that I wanted to talk about is the Ice Golem. I was so excited about the Ice Golem because of how great it is at kiting, and also its distraction value is just so high. Because of that, I thought the Ice Golem was going to be used a ton, and I don't know if it's because people just don't have their Ice Golem leveled up yet or what it is, but I am rarely seeing the Ice Golem in both the tournament and in the ladder. I think that it's an interesting card. I think that people should be using it a little bit more. I love using it to cycle and also to distract. It's a good card, but we'll just see what happens. You're seeing right here, Pinky and the Bee is just letting me take that win. He knows that this is a pointless match, and that is game over. 12 wins for a challenge. A ton of fun. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video, everybody. I really appreciate your support. If you haven't already, like and subscribe. This is KairosTime ticking by, and we will see you in the arena.